Hello, my name is Arif Irfanullah. I am a charter holder and have been preparing candidates for the CFA exams for over 10 years. In this brief clip, I'll share some general information about level 1 of the CFA program. Exam looks like. You are going to have 2 3-hour sessions. So in most parts of the world, this would be from 9 to 12. That's the morning segment. And then from 2 to 5 p.m. this is the afternoon segment. In each session you will have 120 multiple choice questions, and that means you will have a total of 240 questions. These questions are going to be done over a 3+3, which is 6-hour period, and you therefore have 1.5 minutes per question. Now in each of these exams you will get all 10 topics which are shown over here. So in the morning exam you will first see ethics questions, followed by quantitative methods questions, followed by economics, and so on. Over here I show you the weightage of each topic, and this has been taken from the CFA Institute website. Economics has a weight of 10%, which means there will be a total of 24 questions, and these will be spread between the morning and afternoon section. So you are going to see 12 economics questions in the morning and then 12 economics questions in the afternoon. The largest topic at level 1 in terms of number of questions is financial reporting and analysis. This is 20% of the exam, which means 48 questions, and 24 in the morning, 24 in the afternoon. To pass the exam, you need to perform well on all topics, but it is particularly important to do well on FRA. I have seldom seen somebody pass the exam who did poorly on financial reporting and analysis. I'd say that the other topic which is extremely important is quantitative methods, often referred to as quant. Even though this is 12% of the exam, but the concepts that you study in quant are used across several different topics. So to some extent quant will be seen in a few FRA readings. It shows up in corporate finance, portfolio management, equity, fixed income, derivatives, and to some extent even in alternative investments. On this slide I'll talk about what you get when you sign up for the level 1 exam. This is what you get from CFA Institute. The first thing is the curriculum. By default you get the ebook. So this is the online version of the curriculum, which you can download to your computer. If you pay extra, you can also get a hard copy version of the book. So if you like to read physical books, then I would suggest you pay the extra money and get the physical book. Once you sign up, you will also get access to an interactive study planner, and I suggest that you try this out. Some people find it useful, others do not, so take a look at it and decide whether you want to use it or not. The next item is topic tests. These are extremely important and I'll refer to them later. I just showed you the 10 topics which are part of the level 1 curriculum. For every topic, the CFA Institute will give you online tests, and you must do these as part of your preparation. And finally, the CFA Institute also provides mock exams. I strongly recommend that you do these mock exams before taking the actual exam. Topics in demand and supply analysis. This is the first reading in economics, and if you do not have a background in economics, I would strongly recommend that you go over the prerequisite readings which are available on the CFA Institute website. This reading has two major sections: demand analysis, which has to do with the consumer, and supply analysis, which has to do with the firm. Let's start with a very basic introduction. Since this is the first reading in economics, we talk about the definition of economics. There are many different definitions, but here is the one that is used in the curriculum. Economics is the study of production, distribution, and consumption. It is divided into two broad areas: microeconomics and macroeconomics. Macroeconomics deals with aggregate economic quantities such as national output and national income. So terms such as gross domestic product will be used in macroeconomics. Microeconomics deals with markets and decision making of individual economic units, which includes consumers and businesses or firms. And this reading is a microeconomics reading. So let's start with section 2, demand analysis. This is a fairly long section and it has 6 subsections which are shown over here. Demand concepts. Here the first point to learn is the law of demand. According to this law, as the price of a good rises, buyers or consumers will choose to buy less of it, and as the price falls, they buy more. So if you have a particular good such as chairs, when the price of chairs goes up, the quantity of chairs demanded, all else equal, typically will go down, and on the other hand, if the price goes down, the quantity demanded will typically go up. This is the law of demand. When we are talking about a particular good such as chairs, the price of that particular good is referred to as the own price. Now let's take this concept one step further and talk about the demand function. The demand function points out that the demand for a particular good, let's say good A, depends on or is a function of multiple variables. So obviously the demand for a particular good is a function of the price of that good. So demand for good A is a function of the price of A. It is also a function of the income levels. So you can imagine that in general, if incomes are higher, then the demand will be higher. It can also be a function of the prices of other goods. So let's say the price of tables impacts the demand for chairs and so on. Now here is one particular demand function. So let's continue with the chair example. We can say that in a given small town there is a demand for chairs and the demand function is given by this expression. Now you don't need to know exactly where this came from. In the exam world, you will typically be given the demand function. So here what we are told is that the demand for chairs is equal to 10 minus 0.5 times the own price. So in my convention, when I don't use a subscript, I'm assuming this is the price of the good that we are talking about. So if we are talking about chairs, this is the quantity demanded for chairs and this is the price of chairs. But we are saying that the quantity demanded also depends on the income level. So this I represents the average income level in this town, and the quantity demanded for chairs also depends on the price of tables. So this is the average price level for tables in this particular town. If we take a given value for income, so let's say that in this town the average income level is 1633 and on average the price is 800, then we can plug in 1633 over here and 800 over here, and that will give us this expression. So this is expressing the demand for chairs purely in terms of the price of chairs. Now using algebra, we can express this function in terms of the price, and that's called the inverse demand function. So we can say that the price is 200 minus 2q. So if your algebra is weak, I'll show you very quickly how this is done. So you have minus 0.5p. This can go to the left of the equal to sign. So we can say 0.5p is equal to 100 minus, and then the q can come over here. So minus the quantity demanded, and then from this, if we divide everything by 0.5, we have p is equal to 200 minus 2q. So this is called the inverse demand function. Given this inverse demand function, we can very easily plot the demand curve. Notice that P is the y-axis over here. So when we draw the demand curve, the price is on the y-axis, the quantity is always on the x-axis. This point over here is 200. So this comes from over here. When the quantity is 0, the price is 200. What about this point? If the price is 0, then the quantity is 100 and the slope is given by -2. So the coefficient of Q is the slope, so we can say that this slope is -2. The minus is important because this is saying that as price comes down, the quantity goes up, or alternatively, as the price goes up, the quantity demanded goes down. So price and quantity move in an opposite direction, which is why the slope is negative. A couple of points to note regarding this demand curve. This demand curve tells us the highest quantity consumers are willing to purchase at each price. So let's say that the price is 100. This demand curve tells us the maximum quantity that consumers are willing to purchase at a price of 100. The other way of looking at it is that the demand curve tells us the highest price consumers are willing to pay for each quantity. So if the quantity is 75, this price over here will be the highest price that consumers are willing to pay. Now this is a point that's covered in the prerequisite readings, but I'll still emphasize the point over here. When we have a particular demand curve and the only thing that changes is price, so the own price of chairs changes, then we move along the curve. So movement along the curve is when there is a change in price or a change in quantity of chairs. So these two move together along this curve. If anything else changes, such as the income level or the price of tables, then the demand curve will shift. So very simplistically, if overall income levels go up from 1633 to say 2000, then if you come up with a new demand curve, you'll notice that it will be higher than this particular demand curve. So again, remember, if the own price changes and nothing else changes, then we move along the curve. If something other than the own price changes, such as income or the price of tables, then the demand curve will shift. In the next segment, we will cover the elasticity of demand. But before we go there, I want to discuss a very simple mathematical rule with you. Now those who remember their high school calculus will find this familiar, but if you don't remember your high school calculus, it's not a problem. Just understand this basic rule that I am talking about, and then the subsequent segments will become much easier. So let's say we have an expression like this. A variable A is expressed in terms of other variables such as B, C and D. Then the change in A divided by change in B, or delta A over delta B, is equal to the coefficient of B. In this simple expression, the coefficient of B is 5. So delta A over delta B is 5. This assumes that the other variables are held constant. So if C and D are held constant, then change in A over change in B is 5. Now what if B and D are held constant and we want to find delta A over delta C? That is simply the coefficient of C. So the coefficient of C is -6. And similarly, delta A over delta D is equal to 8, which is the coefficient of D. Now, if we go to our demand function from the earlier slide, this is the demand for chairs, which is given by this function. The demand for chairs is 10 minus 0.5 times the price of chairs plus 0.06 times the income level in our town and minus 0.01 times the price of tables. So here if I ask you what's delta Q, and this is the quantity demanded of chairs, divided by delta P, and P is the own price of chairs, the answer is this coefficient. So what you should be coming up with is minus 0.5. Now you tell me, what is delta Q over delta I? You're right, that is 0.06. What about delta Q over delta PT? Now this is the price of tables, and again you are right, the answer is 0.01. Now we come to section 2.2, which is the own price elasticity of demand. So what does this mean? Again, go back to our chairs example. The own price elasticity of demand deals with how the quantity of chairs demanded is impacted by the price of chairs, keeping all else constant. At a basic level, we know that typically if the price goes up, the quantity will come down. But the elasticity tells us by how much. The formal expression for elasticity is shown over here. So this E with the subscript and this postscript is telling us what we are coming up with. The D stands for demand. So we have the elasticity of demand, and the PX stands for the own price. So we are assuming that we are dealing with good X. So if the price of good X changes, then what's the elasticity of demand? That is given by the percentage change in quantity demanded for good X divided by the percentage change in the price of good X. Now, this percentage change can also be shown like this. The percentage change in quantity can be written as the change in quantity divided by the original quantity. So if we started out with a quantity of 100 and then there is a small change, the percentage is given by the delta change, or this is the change divided by the original amount. That gives us the percentage change. And similarly, the percentage change in price is given by the delta P, which is the change in price over the price. And then this can further be simplified into this expression. So change in quantity over change in price times price over quantity. Now I'm keeping things simple here. We are talking about chairs. So this is the quantity demanded for chairs. This is the price of chairs, or these are actually the deltas or the changes. And then P is the price of chairs, Q is the quantity of chairs. So if I were to ask you what's the own price elasticity of demand given this expression, so hopefully now the basic maths lesson I gave you will help. If we want to find the own price elasticity of demand for chairs, we use this expression. What is delta Q over delta P? That is simply this coefficient over here. So that is going to be 0.5 times P over Q. Now on your exam, if you get a question like this, you will have the expression and you will also be told that the price is this much and the quantity is this much. So you might be told, for example, that the price is 50 and the quantity is, let's say, 90. So if you are given these two numbers, then you can just plug in the numbers and come up with the own price elasticity of demand. Now let's dig a little deeper. As we've seen earlier, typically the demand curve is downward sloping. We always have price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis. So what this is saying is that over here, when the price is this much, the quantity is 0. So if the price is too high, there will be 0 demand, and as we decrease the price, the quantity demanded increases. There are some exceptional cases where we might have an upward sloping demand curve, but we'll deal with those cases later. For all negatively sloped linear demand curves, so linear means this is a straight line, elasticity varies depending on where it is calculated. So consider this demand curve. The equation is shown over here, and I've just plotted some points. So this point where the quantity is 0, the price is 200, and you can see that over here. If quantity is 0, price is going to be 200, and where the quantity is 100, that's this point, the price is going to be 0. So this is a simple linear demand curve. So a few more points on this curve. So at this point, when the price is 198, the quantity is 1, and again that's based on this curve. When the price is 100, the quantity is 50, and when the price is 2, the quantity is 99. Now I want you to calculate the elasticity at these 3 points. So let's say this is point A, B and C. So using the formula, and that's this formula, what is the elasticity at point A? We've already seen that this part of the expression, change in Q over change in P, is going to be constant for a linear demand curve, and that constant is this coefficient. So at point A, the elasticity is going to be minus 0.5 multiplied by P over Q. So at this point, P is 198 and Q is 1. So the elasticity here is minus 99. This is extremely elastic. So at this stage we are very elastic, which means that a small percentage change in price will have a huge impact on the percentage change in quantity. So this is clearly an elastic portion of the demand curve. What about point B? Here the elasticity is again 0.5 or minus 0.5, because this part doesn't change, multiplied by the price over quantity. Price is 100, quantity is 50. So notice this gives us minus 1. This point, therefore, point B, is called the unit elastic point. Unit elastic point means that a 1% change in price causes a 1% change in quantity. And then what about point C? Here we'll have minus 0.5 multiplied by price over quantity. Price is 2, quantity is 99. So you'll notice that this is a very small number. So a percentage change in price has a very low impact on the percentage change in quantity. Therefore, this part is called our inelastic part. And now you can see the progression along this demand curve. Here we are elastic, and as we move down, the numerator, which is the price, comes down, the denominator, which is the quantity, goes up. So this fraction is clearly coming down, which means that in absolute terms the elasticity is coming down as the price decreases. We come to point B where we are unit elastic, and as we go further down we become more and more inelastic. So that illustrates this point. For all negatively sloped linear demand curves, elasticity varies depending on where it's calculated, and now we've shown that elasticity is high in this region, low in this region, and we have unit elasticity over here. You also need to understand the concept of a perfectly elastic demand curve and perfectly inelastic demand curve. So if we have price over here, quantity over here, a perfectly elastic demand curve is horizontal. So notice that a very small change in price over here has a huge impact on the quantity. Perfectly inelastic would be something like this. So with a perfectly inelastic demand curve, no matter what happens to the price, the quantity remains unchanged. So just remember this: perfectly elastic horizontal demand curve, perfectly inelastic vertical demand curve. There are several factors that affect demand elasticity. Probably the biggest one is the availability of close substitutes. If for a given product there are several close substitutes, then the elasticity is going to be high. Consider, for example, a product, let's say the Toyota Corolla car. Now, the Toyota Corolla has several close substitutes, such as the Honda Civic or the Lancer, and if you are in the US, there will be several American cars that are close substitutes. If the price of Toyota Corolla goes up, the quantity demanded of this product is going to come down substantially, because consumers will then move towards other cars that are similar to the Toyota Corolla. So keep this in mind. If there are several close substitutes, then the own price elasticity is likely to be high. Now, when we consider a good, it's also important to think about how we consider a good. So here we thought about a particular type of car. What if our product is much more broadly defined? So if our broader product is cars, then substitutes are available, but they might not be very close, and also it might depend on which city you are in. If you are in a city like London, then other types of transport such as the underground rail might be easily available. On the other hand, if you are in a city like Dallas, then there might not be so many close substitutes. But let's consider a city like Dallas where there is effectively no public transportation. Now there obviously the substitutes are not easily available. So if we define our category as cars, then a change in price is not likely to have a huge impact on the quantity demanded. So in this case, the elasticity will be relatively low. Next point, portion of total budget. Now the key point to remember is if a given product represents a high percentage of your budget or the consumer's budget, then the elasticity is also going to be high. Consider cars versus bread. So obviously bread will represent a small percentage of a typical household's income. Now if the price of bread goes up by 30% and the price of cars goes up by 30%, the impact on the quantity of bread demanded is going to be marginal. So we can say that this is relatively inelastic. The elasticity will be rather low. On the other hand, the price of cars is obviously high relative to bread, and this represents a higher percentage of the budget for most people. So a 30% increase in the price of cars is going to have a much larger impact on the demand for cars relative to a 30% increase here in the price of bread. So the higher the portion of the total budget, the greater the elasticity. The next point has to do with the time horizon. Here the quick point is that if the time horizon is long, then the elasticity will be relatively high. So let's go back to our cars example. Now if the price of cars goes up by 30%, in the short run the quantity demanded will come down, but probably not by very much. However, in the long term, people will find other modes of transport, and therefore the quantity demanded is going to come down much more if we take a longer term perspective. So the point is, the longer the time horizon, the higher the elasticity. And finally, we need to consider whether the product is discretionary or optional, or whether it is non-discretionary. Now clearly, if you have a product such as a vacation package, which is discretionary or optional, there if the price goes up, the quantity demanded is likely to go down substantially. So we can say that the elasticity is high. On the other hand, if you have something non-discretionary like bread, here when the price goes up, the quantity demanded will not go down by much. So when you have non-discretionary items, the elasticity is relatively low. Now let's consider the relationship between elasticity and total expenditure. Total expenditure is the total amount that a consumer spends on a product. Total expenditure is simply the price into quantity. So over here we are looking at our regular demand curve with price on the y-axis, quantity on the x-axis, and here we are looking at quantity on the x-axis and total expenditure on the y-axis. Total expenditure again is price into quantity. Now at this point we have a very high price and quantity is 0. So what is the total expenditure? It is 0 times some high number, which is 0. But as we move down the demand curve, what's happening to price? Price is coming down and quantity is increasing. So price down, quantity is up. In percentage terms, this is going to dominate. So what's the overall impact on total expenditure? If the price is coming down by a small amount and quantity is going up by a large amount, the total expenditure is obviously increasing. So we are going to move like this. And this will continue as long as we are in the elastic part of this curve. So let's say over here the elasticity is higher, high being greater than 1. As long as the elasticity is greater than 1, a decrease in price is going to result in a relatively high increase in quantity and therefore an increase in the total expenditure. So up to this point, our quantity is going to increase. Over here, let's say we are unit elastic. If we are unit elastic, then a decrease in price by 1% causes an increase in quantity by 1%. So these two balance out. Therefore, at this point where we are unit elastic, the total expenditure does not change. Now after this, we get to the inelastic part of the demand curve. So now if the price comes down by a certain amount, the quantity will go up, but not by much. So the overall impact is that total expenditure will start coming down. And when we come all the way over here, price is 0, so obviously the total expenditure is 0. So the points to note over here are that as we decrease the price in this elastic portion, the total expenditure goes up, and in the inelastic region, the total expenditure comes down, and it comes all the way down to 0, which corresponds to this point. Income elasticity of demand. So the income elasticity of demand is defined as the percentage change in quantity demanded for a particular good, say good X, divided by the percentage change in income. Now, as we've seen before, this can be expressed like this: the change in quantity demanded of X over change in income multiplied by the particular income level divided by the quantity demanded. So you need to learn both these expressions. For a normal good, income elasticity is positive, and most goods are normal goods. A positive income elasticity says that as income goes up, the quantity demanded for a particular good goes up. So if this is the case, then we say that the good is normal. Some goods are inferior goods. Here, when the income goes up, the quantity demanded comes down. So consider places like India and Pakistan, and think about a regular bicycle which is used for actual transportation, not for recreation. Now, generally bicycles are used by people who are relatively poor. If their income levels go up, then instead of a bicycle, they would prefer a motorcycle. So we can say that at least in South Asia, regular bicycles are probably inferior goods. As incomes go up, the quantity demanded for regular bicycles goes down. In the US context, we can think of fast food as being an inferior good. So in the US, fast food is relatively inexpensive. So if a family from, let's say, a low income background decides to go out, they are probably going to visit a fast food joint. But as income levels go up, then they might prefer going to a fancier restaurant. So there, as income goes up, if the quantity demanded for fast food comes down, then we can say that fast food is an inferior good. In an exam context, you need to be able to calculate the income elasticity, and you also need to be able to say whether the good that we are talking about is normal or inferior. So we go back to this expression that we've used for chairs. The quantity demanded for chairs is equal to this. Now here we are only going to consider the impact of a change in income. So assume the own price stays the same and the price of tables stays the same. What happens to the quantity demanded when income goes up? So notice a positive relationship here. When the income goes up, the quantity demanded goes up. So this implies that chairs are a normal good if this demand function holds. Now you might be asked to calculate that elasticity number. So what you would do is take this coefficient, so that's this number over here. So that is delta Q over delta I, which, as I've discussed before, is this coefficient. So the elasticity is going to be 0.06 times the income level divided by quantity demanded. So if you are given an income level of 2000, so on your exam this number will be given, and then you will be given a certain quantity. So let's say that number is 75. You can simply plug in the numbers and calculate the income elasticity of demand. The cross elasticity of demand has to do with how the quantity of a given product X is impacted by the change in price of another product, say Y. Now, going back to our example on chairs and tables, so this is the demand function for chairs. So quantity demanded of chairs is given by this expression. Now, let's say the price of chairs is the same, the income level doesn't change, but the price of another product, tables, changes. What is the impact on the quantity demanded of chairs? And that's where the cross elasticity of demand comes in. If the quantity demanded of chairs is very sensitive to the price of tables, then we say that this cross elasticity is high. So this is the basic expression, which takes the same form as the other elasticity expressions. The difference is always in the denominator. So the numerator always is the percentage change in quantity demanded for our item X. The denominator for own price was the percentage change in the price of X. When we talked about income elasticity, then the denominator was the percentage change in income, and now with cross elasticity, the denominator is the percentage change in price of the other item. This can then be simplified as follows, and again this should look familiar. The first part is the coefficient, so change in Q over change in price of the other product. That is going to be this item here. So with chairs and tables, where chair is the product that we are studying and tables is the other product, this is going to be 0.01, and then we multiply by the price of the other product divided by the quantity demanded of X. On the next slide we'll do an example that covers this formula in detail. The cross elasticity of demand is positive for a substitute. So what does this mean? Let's say that you have a product such as chairs, and a substitute to chairs is stools. If the price of stools goes up, what will happen to the quantity demanded for chairs? Obviously, the quantity demanded will go up. On the other hand, if the price of stools comes down, more people are likely to buy stools, so the quantity demanded for chairs comes down. Notice that the price of a substitute and the quantity demanded of our product move up and down together. So when this goes up, the quantity demanded goes up. When this comes down, the quantity demanded comes down. So that is why the cross elasticity of demand is positive for a substitute. What if we have a complement? So clearly tables complement chairs. With a complement, the cross elasticity is going to be negative, and that's what we are seeing over here. This negative sign is telling us that if the price of tables goes up, then the quantity demanded of chairs, which is the product that we are concerned with, will go down. Now let's consider a very simple example. So we are given this demand function. So we have a product A, and the quantity demanded of A is expressed in terms of the price of A, the income level, the price of B, and then the price of C. So B and C are other products. At a given point in time, we are told that the price of A is 10 and the price of B is 55, price of C is 10, and the income level is 2000. The first question is calculate the own price elasticity of demand for A. Now you need to remember the formulas. So the own price elasticity of demand for A is given by this coefficient, so that's minus 12, multiplied by the price over quantity. So we take the own price and divide by the quantity. So we know the own price is 10, but we do not know the quantity. However, based on all these values, the quantity can easily be calculated. So we can plug 10 over here. Income level is 2000, so we plug that here. Price of B is 55, price of C is 10. When we plug in these numbers, we get quantity equal to 90. So now we can solve this easily. So we have minus 12 into price of A, which is 10, divided by quantity, which is 90, and this gives us minus 1.33. As we've discussed before, the own price elasticity is generally going to be negative, because when the own price goes up, the quantity demanded will typically go down. So that explains the negative number. 1.33 has an absolute value more than 1, so this is elastic. Next question, income elasticity of demand for A. So again, this takes the same form. With income elasticity, we take this coefficient, and notice that this is a positive, which means that item A is a normal good. So we take the coefficient, which is 0.015, multiplied by, now the denominator will always be the quantity. The numerator here is income. So what is the income level over here? It is 2000. That comes from here. And when we solve this, we get 0.33. This is a positive number, which implies that the product is a normal good and it's relatively low. So the income elasticity is relatively low. Third question, cross price elasticity of demand. Again, the same form. So we want the cross price elasticity of demand for A against the price of B. So that's this item. Now we take this coefficient 3, because that's the coefficient related to the price of B. So we take 3 multiplied by the price of B, which is 55, divided by the quantity, which is 90. So this is 1.83, a positive number, and we could see that this is positive right up over here, which implies that as the price of B goes up, the quantity demanded of A goes up. So this means that B and A must be substitutes, and in fact this is a relatively high number, so the quantity demanded of A is fairly sensitive to changes in price of B. So are A and B substitutes or complements? The answer is that clearly A and B are substitutes. What about the cross price elasticity of demand of A against the price of C? Now I want you to do this. And again, this is fairly straightforward. So minus 4.5, you take that coefficient and then multiplied by the price of C, which is 10, divided by 90. This is a negative number, which implies that A and C are complements. We have talked about the law of demand, which says that a decrease in price causes the quantity demanded to increase, and this explains a negatively sloped demand curve. So as always, we have price over here, quantity here, and as we decrease price, the quantity demanded typically increases. Now there are two reasons for the law of demand. One reason is the substitution effect, and the other reason is the income effect. So let's understand the substitution effect first. Consider a product such as apricots, and then let's say that the other product is a basket of other fruits. Now what happens when the price of apricots comes down? If the price of apricots comes down, then apricots are cheaper relative to other fruit. So consumers are then likely to buy more apricots. In essence, since apricots are cheaper, they are substituting more apricots into their diet. So this is a substitution effect, which implies that a lower price causes a higher quantity demanded. What about the income effect? Again, apricots on the one hand, this is our product, and then we have a basket of other fruits. When the price of apricots comes down, the real income of the consumer goes up, because if the consumer is still buying the same amount of apricots, let's say in a given month he consumes 50 apricots, but if the price of apricots is lower, then he spends less money but still gets the same number of apricots, and therefore we can say that his spending power has increased, which means that the real income has increased. If real income has increased and apricots is a normal good, then what will happen to the quantity demanded? The answer is the quantity demanded will go up. So higher real income, this is a normal good, so quantity demanded goes up. So in this case, the income effect is also causing the quantity demanded to go up, and this is all happening in response to a lower price. So remember, lower price is what causes the real income to effectively become higher, and hence the quantity demanded is also going up. So when we have a decrease in price, the increase in quantity is happening because of the substitution effect and the income effect. Now let's draw a distinction between normal goods and inferior goods. Remember, a normal good has a positive income elasticity, which means that when income goes up, the quantity demanded goes up. With an inferior good, we have a negative income elasticity. So if income goes up, quantity demanded comes down. Here we are actually considering real income, and earlier I talked about regular income, but this concept still applies with real income. So with a normal good, what happens when the price comes down? So price comes down, substitution effect, as we just saw with apricots, is that quantity demanded goes up. What about the income effect for a normal good? When price goes down, the real income goes up, and with a normal good, the quantity demanded goes up. This is what we just saw. Now coming to an inferior good. When the price goes down, the substitution effect still says that quantity goes up. So remember, the inferior good is an inferior good because of the income effect. This is the substitution effect. So the substitution effect still says that a lower price results in a higher quantity. But what about the income effect? Price goes down, which means that real income goes up, and with an inferior good, the real income going up causes the quantity demanded to go down. So with an inferior good, the two effects, the substitution effect and the income effect, operate in opposite directions. For most inferior goods, the substitution effect dominates the income effect, which means that a decrease in price still results in an overall increase in quantity demanded. There are, however, some exceptions. Now consider a Giffen good, and this is named after an economist who first saw this phenomenon that I'm about to describe. Now there can be a situation where the income effect dominates the substitution effect. So let's say that we are in rural China and we are considering the demand for rice. Now the poor peasants spend most of their money on rice, which is their staple food. What happens when the price of rice goes down? So price of rice goes down. The substitution effect still says that the quantity demanded will go up, because rice is now cheaper relative to other goods. So the consumer, i.e. the poor peasant in this case, is going to consume more rice because of the substitution effect. So the quantity demanded is up according to the substitution effect. But what about the income effect? When the price is down, the real income for this peasant goes up, and since rice is an inferior good for the poor peasant, the quantity demanded actually comes down. What the peasant might now do is take this extra disposable income that he has and spend it on other food items such as meat and vegetables. So the quantity of rice demanded goes down when his real income goes up. If the income effect dominates the substitution effect, then what do we have? Then a decrease in price is also resulting in a decrease in quantity. So if we look at a demand curve with price over here and quantity over here, let's say that we start at this point and say the price comes down. If the price comes down and the quantity also comes down, then we have this shape of the demand curve, and this is a positively sloped demand curve. So for given goods, remember two key points. Key point number one is that it's an inferior good where the income effect is dominating the substitution effect, and the second point is that for such a good we have a positively sloping demand curve. So that is one exception to the law of demand. Another exception to the law of demand has to do with Veblen goods. Now these are conspicuous consumption goods. These are goods that derive value based on their price. People buy these goods to show others that they have a lot of money. So in other words, if these goods become more expensive, then they become even more valuable. Think about jewelry or luxury cars, where if somebody is driving a luxury car to show how well off he is, then the luxury good becoming even more expensive will increase demand. So here again, looking at the demand curve, if we are at this point and the price goes up, if this is a conspicuous consumption good which derives its value based on how expensive it is, then a higher price would mean a higher quantity demanded. So this also would have a positively sloped demand curve. Now the Giffen good and the Veblen good both have a positively sloped demand curve, but for very different reasons, and you need to understand the reasons that I just talked about.